Good evening. Welcome to another riveting edition. It sounds like I'm the announcer at a sports game right now. Hold on, let me check my echo here. Oh, there we go. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Okay, welcome to another riveting edition of The Ghosts and the Goat. I'm your host, Buddy Thayer. I'd like to welcome you to another, like I said, another riveting edition of my show. Oh, I am normally joined by my co-host Bams, Brandon, who is currently missing in the fields right now. He's honestly, like, also my special co-host this evening, who is going to be Sensei Jay, who is going to add commentary to our guest, who is currently having issues signing on. Private chat. Let me look at that really quick, because this is our guest. The instructions to activate the camera and mic don't work. Oh, Gene, I don't know what to say. Try your phone, Gene. Gene, try your phone. Hold on. I'm trying to mitigate these issues that I no longer have and that my guests are having. Try to use your phone, lady. Please. Gene. All right. So my co-host Bams is missing in action, missing in the fields, and my and do what with my phone? Click on the link, Gene. Click on the link. On the link. Oh my god. If it's gonna go wrong, it's gonna happen to this guy and my Boston Red Sox. Because so like I was saying before, I'm on a PC. Gene, I don't know what to tell you, honey. I hope you figure it out. If you don't, this is gonna be a really short show. Oh, good lord. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me on this. Me neither. Okay. I don't know what that means. So my guest this evening, Jean Broida, she's a parapsychologist. She's a UFO researcher. She is a author. She is not savvy with the internet, as she keeps going in and out on my green screen here. So I don't know if I'm going to have her on. But while I wait for Jean to try and hopefully figure out what's going on with her connectivity problems, uh, you know, um, from Mass. Oh, lovely. I'm from Rhode Island. Thanks for joining us, Stephen. I have a lovely, big fan of wrestling. You would love to check out our show, the Mid Card, on Friday nights. If Bams ever comes in from the fields, you might be able to see that. But I'm not yet sure. I don't know where Bams is tonight. Sensei Jay had an emergency. He's still stuck at work, so his insight on the UFC and UFOs we're going to go without. And it appears that I'm going to go without my guest, Jean Broida, who is also struggling with internet issues. While I have you all propped up in front of me for the time that I might have you, let me remind you that if you were tuned in just now to a Van Down by the River podcast on Facebook, my Facebook account, my Facebook page, or Buddy Thayer, that is, or a Van Down by the River podcast, the channel on YouTube, you happen to see the third episode of Three Dudes Brews, which is kind of like a reflush, because our original broadcast of that came out like wicked sketchy. Oh, Gene. Oh, I see a name, Gene. Maybe. Okay, well, hold on a second, Gene. I'll cross my fingers and hopefully we'll be right with you. Anyway, Jay is not available this evening, and I'm sorry, Three Dudes Brews. I get distracted really easy. Three Dudes Brews, our episode 3 was a reflush, and we put it back together again. We did a new intro and we put it out there. So check that out. Episode 4, we're gonna play probably on Saturday. It's us live from, not live, but it's gonna be us from Six Pack Brewing, also in Bristol, which was filmed last month. This month, though, this Saturday, right after you catch us, our episode 4, you can catch us on the Van Down by the River podcast, or Van Down by the River podcast channel on YouTube, and check out our live broadcast of Three Dudes Brews from the Ocean State Brew Fest, which will host 10 to 12 of the best brewers in Rhode Island, and this dude's face and my other two dudes, and we're going to walk around drinking good beers and talking to people about drinking good beers and talking to people about good beers that they enjoy drinking in the hot summertime in Rhode Island, and all sorts of beer talk. We're gonna get to all that on Saturday. Later this month, we are also doing another episode of Three Dudes Brews live from, well, no, it won't be live, it will be filmed, but from Block Island, Rhode Island. We're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a side trip, and we're going to do a dive bar over there on the block, and we're gonna do some maybe some ghosty stuff. We'll see. So tune in for that one. My good friend Rick Lysak, he owns the Club Soda over there in Block Island. He also owns Block Island Ghost Tours. Check it out. They are not sure to disappoint. It's Block Island's this gem that exists in the middle of Block Island Sound. Go figure that. In the Atlantic Ocean, I guess you could say, bordering. It's a part of Rhode Island. It's 13 miles out. It's a little island. Tons of people, tons of culture, tons of ghosts, tons of haunted places. Get to Block Island. So my guest this evening, I'm seeing her there, so I'm going to hold my breath and I'm going to announce her, and we'll see what happens with Jean. She, like I said, she's a parapsychologist. She has authored the book on UFO on 10 most haunted. Oh my God, 10 most UFO cases in the U.S. She'll give it the appropriate title when she comes on. I'm sorry, Jean. Yeah, she does tarot and stuff. Please welcome to the show. I've never had her on this show, but I've had her on many other shows, and she's always a delight. Welcome. Nice to talk to you again. Hopefully I get to talk to you again, Jean Broida. Jean, you here?
Hi, buddy. I'm not. Where am I? I see my background, but where am I?
You're the voice in the sky, Jean. That's kind of cool.
I am the eye in the sky.
It almost looks like I'm looking up at a UFO. Oh.
I'm playing with my settings. I've been having Mercury is retrograde. I have it on good authority, and it is messing with me. With me.
Jean, I battle the internet almost every week, and it's it's never fun, but it is what it is. Oh,
can you see me now?
No, it's not sky. Okay. No, it's blue.
All right.
Back to sky again.
They're working.
Doing what you're doing, Jean.
What about this?
Hey, I see your face. Oh, Jean, you're there. Oh, wonderful. Beautiful, Jean. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show. It's just going to be yourself and myself this evening. My friend Sensei Jay got stuck at the dojo, actually got stuck at the plant. And Bams, I don't know what Bams is this evening, but there's enough. You rivet me every time I talk to you, so I'm sure there's enough for you to keep us well informed throughout the.
I can talk for an hour.
Yeah, I know you can.
But please stop me so you can get a word in.
Of course. So your book is unknown. What's your book called? I'm sorry, Jean.
I was gonna get it. Let me go get it. Fill a little. 30 seconds or less here.
All right.
This has been a day of obstacles.
Oh, you tell me it's my Tuesday.
Is that I sprained my knee, so everything takes twice as long. But
of course,
BRB.
I hurt myself as well.
Talk amongst yourselves.
I will talk amongst myself. So while my two co-hosts are at work and have work emergencies, I have been off for the last 3 days because I went on a rafting trip up in Massachusetts, up in western Massachusetts, up on the Deerfield River, which is way north of here. It's close to the former Gardner Mansion, the Houghton Mansion, which used to be a haunted location I used to go to, but they got shut down because they didn't pay the taxes. But I saw death flash before my eyes. I was in a rafting group. We were going down the river. Everything was going smooth. Betty Jo said, "It'll be fine. The river will take us around the rocks." And next thing I know, I thought I saw Bigfoot, and I looked, and it wasn't Bigfoot, and it was a giant rock. I did a backflip over the rock, hit my head, got dragged for several hundred feet or so, concussed myself. Luckily enough, I did not. The doctor told me how lucky I was that I wasn't knocked unconscious. I'm like, "Doc, you told me the river was like a class 2 rapid system, and I banged my head, and I was in like 4 feet of water. I would have definitely drowned for sure." But luckily enough, I made it here. I had sick time. This is my day off. This has been a really nice Tuesday because I haven't had all the bullshit at work. So while my other two co-hosts are fiddling with the nonsense at work, I'm overjoyed to welcome you, Jean Broida. So Jean Broida, what's the name of your book?
The name of my book is Unknown Objects, which is a term from the 1950s U.S. military inquiries, some of the first inquiries historically. Unknown objects, before they knew UFOs or UAPs, much less.
Oh, what do they call it now?
And what you were struggling for was the top 10 U.S. UFO cases.
That's right.
So how qualified? What? I love the clouds, but they are messing.
They're messing up your jive, man.
They are. They're messing my scene. We'll go blur.
Oh, that works. Yeah, whatever.
Blur is the savior of lazy housekeepers.
No.
Uh-oh, uh-oh,
No.
whoa, whoa,
Oh, baby.
whoa,
Oh, yeah, there it is. It's coming in.
Is it?
I
Man, that's
well,
close.
I know what
What
it
the
looks
heck?
like. So I think,
I know you know.
yeah.
Oh,
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 sort of. Well,
I
kind
don't
of,
know what
sort
the
of.
problem is. Too much glare.
Yeah.
Unknown objects. The top 10 U.S. UFO cases. That's not good. Pa boom. No bueno.
No, that's not
What
good.
if I put it in front of
Anyway,
me? Here we go.
well, there you go.
Something's
Yeah,
going
yeah.
on. Something is.
Well, no,
Okay, so take a good look, people. Take a good look.
it's gonna disappear soon.
Amazon. Amazon.
Check it out. Unknown
There we go.
objects. I'll run
So it's
a link.
so I thought the title was provocative, but apparently I'm one of the very few, the top 10 UFO cases. I thought, well, some people who do a lot of research in UFOs, and there are many, 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 should be a bit outraged. How is it that these, who am I to say that these are the top 10, not
Right.
a
That's
top
pretty
10, but
presumptuous.
the top 10, clickbait. We're bordering on clickbait here.
But
all I can say in my own defense is that I started at the end of World War II, and I brought us up to the Phoenix Lights mass sighting, because by the time of the Phoenix Lights, pretty much everything about the UFO topic would have been covered. And yes, there were major events that came afterward, but by the time of the Phoenix Lights, which was 1980s, pretty much every credible to ridiculous scenario as far as UFOs were concerned had been covered.
Yeah, right. As of UFO, I'm not really a UFO guy. I mean, I'm fascinated by it,
You're
but
a ghost guy, aren't you?
I'm more of a ghost guy. But as my knowledge takes me, I've seen like imagery of possible UFOs in like medieval paintings, and then you see it spotted out like in antiquity. There's a few stories here and there, like Romans seeing it like during wartime, or there's like spots here and there throughout the Middle Ages and whatnot, but it really doesn't like really hit home, it seems, until after World War II. Is that something that you find, or is that just me?
Well, the thing about World War II is that technology started to
the use of atomic weapons
explode. Now,
primarily maybe was what
I mean, let's put the digital technology began to explode because we had in the West the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s with steam power. Okay, and then we got to transistors for radios, and then all of a sudden we switched from transistors to chips, microchips. That's quite a heady leap. And some of our researchers believe that it was aliens. It was aliens who put it to human scientists, human governments, and human scientists that to facilitate communication between their races and our races, because we have ethnic races on Earth. To facilitate communication, we needed to go digital. In other words, we needed to develop computers in much the same way that in Europe, Roman numerals had been the convention up until the introduction of zero, the concept of zero from North Africa and more Eastern countries. The East grasped zero pretty early on, and the West was slow to the party. So it wasn't until the Middle Ages that that Europe shucked Roman numerals and went to zero-based Arabic numerals. They're called Arabic numerals for a reason. They came out of Arabia and Arabic countries. And I mean no disrespect. It's some of the best math and science comes out of Northern Africa from that period of time. It's astonishing, really. And so something comparable, in my opinion, happened at the time of World War II. Major powers in the world, political powers, were throwing scads of money at equipment development and technology development. But when you get into metaphysics, there were some really bizarre experiments at the time of World War II and soon afterward. I'm thinking particularly of the Philadelphia experiment. Have you heard of that one, buddy?
Yeah, that's what they made like people disappear and reappear, right? That was like that was a movie actually, but yeah.
The objective was to take Nikola Tesla's theory about bending light, given a strong enough gravitational field, electromagnetic or gravitational field. And they all actually, there's probably those three forces are at play. electricity, magnetism, and gravity. Okay, so Tesla said the objective was for the military, let's make ships invisible. We want a cloaking device for ships.
Right.
So that the German U-boats can't spot our big ships that don't evade very well and sink them. And that was going on a lot.
Makes sense.
So Tesla came on board. He was enthusiastic at first. He did all the math. He said the problem is that so much force is required, so much power needs to be generated, that I'm concerned that the electromagnetic fields will interfere with human biology and human psyche. And that's what ended up being true, because at the time of the actual experiment, the ship phased in and out of temporal realities, if we are to believe the surviving witnesses. And according to first-hand accounts, some of the crew members who had phased into another reality or dimension or whatever you want to call it, when they came back to this reality, they were in another harbor, for one thing, and some of the crew members, unfortunately, had rematerialized in components of the ship.
Yeah, right.
Bulwarks and shelves, and it was
horrifying.
crazy. Also, some reports, some of the witnesses said they had seen aliens, as in ET, on the ship, on board the ship. There are so many reports out of this one case that are, each one is mind-boggling. It's just cuckoo crazy.
Right, it is.
What went on there?
So how do you, as a researcher, how do you...
Experiment. So, by the way, Tesla backed out of the experiment, and the military chief of the project took over. And he's very gung-ho, you know, when they say jump, how high, right? How high, sir? So he was convinced they would do it, and they built huge generators on the pier that went out toward the ship, and on the ship itself, they had mega generators. I think maybe on boats nearby, although I'm a little sketchy on that. But be that as it may, there was a lot of activity around this to make it work. And long story short, it didn't work. But so, the Navy was the Navy that pushed the project through, despite Tesla's safety concerns, because they really wanted to have this invisibility cloak. Sorry.
Well, yeah, that's a good weapon. Let me ask Gene, as a researcher, as somebody who you have a master's degree in computer science, am I right?
I do.
How do you mitigate between these stories and the microchip coming from aliens? Is that something you believe is factual, is true, or is that...
It's quite reasonable. I can't speak for factuality, but when we think about the digital explosion and some technologies that came out of that,
true.
I remember my dad bringing in one of the first microwave ovens for home use. He was he worked at a think tank in a very high level, vice president and then later president. So he jetted around to all kinds of sciencey conventions and demonstrations, and occasionally we got some juicy anecdotes back home around the dinner table.
I bet.
But when he brought home the first, I'll never forget when he brought home the first microwave oven, he had some cautionaries about radiation. He had worked developing nuclear bombs in World War II as a technician, measuring the effects. So they'd already built bombs, and they wanted to know just what they did in terms of kinds of radiation, thermal radiation, but also photonic, the light itself, and all kinds, gamma, beta, all the kinds of rays that a scientist would love to study, right? And they were flying planes up and around and setting off nukes out in the Southwest, flying around, measuring. And my dad had teams, hired teams to construct towers to wire measuring apparatus on. And then they were monitoring from inside a bunker. But the infantry were outside behind dirt mounds, dirt barriers. Everybody had polarized goggles. They had blast headphones, like earphones, wear at a shooting range. I've got those. I still have those old timey, 1950s tech. So he was also involved as a future thinker and technologist. He was involved at the time of, soon after his work, he worked for 1 year as a contractor to the military working on nukes, and that was it. He was done with the military for the rest of his life. But he did get into some other projects that were highly technological, including some of the first computer stuff. And when I read stories, my dad never talked about any of this stuff as anything other than business for the think tank. Okay. But now we know that some military projects that were contracted to Boeing, Lockheed, et cetera, these big aerospace companies, those companies in turn subcontracted. This goes on all the time. And who's to say that my dad wasn't actually a subcontractor or even a CIA spook? I have no idea. All I know, he was gone for weeks at a time. He would get up from the dinner table to answer phone calls and be gone for the rest of the evening. What is so important about a job that requires that level of commitment, I ask you?
Right.
But he also had been to a demonstration on the first mag lift for fast trains. They were developing that in Tokyo. And the Tokyo engineers brought an expo to the US and he got in on that. It was just one advanced technology after another. So given the hindsight of history and what other people's experiences were, there were other people saying, my dad was in the military and I got involved in a fill in the blank project, time travel, space, secret space program, the list goes on. That because of a family member, somebody got inducted into one of these top secret programs. It looks like my dad went in the other direction, at least on the surface. He didn't want involvement in the military or even as a contractor to that level. And it wasn't because he thought the technology was too destructive in the hands of the people wielding it. I don't know. We never had that discussion. But he did talk about how the effects of radiation last a whole lifetime in human beings. If you ingest radiation or are exposed to radiation, even at the dental office, the body can't expel that radiation. It continues to accumulate, and over a lifetime, it can start to really attack the immune system and bad things. You get minor radiation poisoning, basically,
right?
If you live that long.
Pretty terrible.
So it's a trade-off between the advantages of advanced technology versus the risks.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
The downside. So I think, going back to your original question, do I think these advanced techs may have come from aliens? Yes, I do. But the key word is may. Do I have proof? Absolutely not. But do I like to speculate about it? Oh, yeah.
Like the whole moon landing, right? Now, for years, people would suggest, oh, that was faked on like a stage. I'm like, no. Why would they do that? But then like a good friend of mine who's like he's actually in the military, he suggested that it could be possible during that time, and then suggested that we never made any future travels to the moon. It was like the most important thing of the decade. We did it, and then we were done. What are your thoughts on that, Gene?
Right. Well, that's a great question, buddy, and I'm glad you asked it, because when I got back into ufology, I was avid in my teen years, but got sidetracked as a young adult with career stuff and other stuff. I got into astrology and other kinds of metaphysics instead. But what drew me back to UFOs was a stray video on YouTube in 2014 I watched on crop circles. And crop circles is one of my main subjects. I'm really gaga on crop circles. One, because it's so non-threatening to people, whereas the topic of UFOs puts people off often quite a bit. So I watched a very good video on UFOs, and on crop circles, and that re-sparked my interest in crop circles. And I thought, I wonder what else is going on ufology street. So I was looking, how YouTube has a sidebar with, well, if you watch this, you might like to watch that.
Like this too.
Right.
Yeah. They suck you right in.
There was a video that had the word disclosure in the title, and I thought, I don't, at the time, I was not following any political videos at all. I'm a libertarian, and I just didn't have any interest in mainstream or other commentary at the time in 2014. But this was disclosure, and I thought and it was lurid. It was clickbait for sure. And it was something to do with disclosure. And I figured it's some kind of political scandal. So I clicked into it, and lo and behold, they start talking about UFOs right away. And that put me on to Dr. Stephen Greer with his International Disclosure Project, to the point where in Denver, in that same year, 2014, I was awakened, as were so many other people, reawakened really. And I started the Denver UFO Disclosure Group on Meetup, and we got about 60 people, I think, at our most robust. But we had trouble with the fact that Denver and surrounding communities are very spread out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a concentration of populations, it's all spread out. So finding a centralized location was very difficult. People had trouble making the commute to meetings. So we started doing virtual meetings before. That was cool. And that really was awesome. That was really awesome. But that a lot of people I've talked to in my shows and as a guest on other shows say the same thing. And I wonder how many people listening right now, because seeing a lot of lively chat, which is awesome, amongst our visitors and guests and esteemed listeners, how many people out there who can hear my voice have had that experience? Maybe I'm not being cogent.
The experience of seeing a UFO, Gene, is that?
Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought.
It's all right. Let me ask you. Let me answer that. Let me lead to that. So
I thought I
your
was
father
being so
was
clever and witty, and I just ended up in a knot.
Your dad was a potential UFO guy in the Southwest. You're an author of UFO activity around the U.S. Have you yourself ever experienced anything potentially UFO or UAP, whatever you want to call it nowadays?
Well, like many people, I suspect I've been abducted, because why else would I be at all interested in the topic, for one thing?
Do you have any memories? Do you have any memories of that, or?
Well, if I have memories, I don't want to remember them, because I reject hypnosis. I reject my subconscious rejects hypnotic regression, and I've done a lot of work with my subconscious doing magic. So I can evoke and invoke and also exorcise. Those are amongst, I can make weather. I'm a weather worker. And I know it sounds, and I've also done some fairly miraculous healing, which seems, they sound like outlandish claims, but in context, everything seemed very reasonable. As things unfolded during all those episodes, it didn't seem incredible particularly, because the secret to effective magic is the understanding that it will work. It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of certainty and knowledge. And when you approach magic from that perspective, all of a sudden it becomes potentized, which is another aspect of magic I looked at a lot, how to potentize, make more potent what one is doing with one's individual will. And that's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself. But I did want to make one amendment to something you just said. I cannot link my dad to UFO development, but it wouldn't surprise me if he had been researching that tech on the sly. I will never know. I've been looking for a medium, a psychic, who could channel that information. My dad has left the earth plane, but I'm not sure he'd even tell me from beyond the grave. I have no idea. He was very secretive. I'm not open, but he was uber secretive. And he was working on advanced tech, the kind of thing you'd see in a think tank. Were those guys getting technology from landed UFOs? That's where I was trying to get earlier. Did the technology that think tank groups in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s were working on, did that actual tech, or the technology at the root of that tech? So the idea that, yes, you could build a fiber optic cable, and here's what one looks like. The idea that, yes, you could build a computer, and here's what one looks like. In other words, the aliens are saying to humans, you could have this and you could have that. Speaking of fiber optics, I'm hearkened back to the story that probably should have been first in my book, or at least chapter 2. This happened in Missouri, and it's southeastern Missouri near the New Madrid Fault. And there was a crash, and a reverend was brought out to say last rites. A Christian reverend was brought out to perform last rites over some corpses. He assumed it was a plane crash, but as he described it in a letter to his daughter, which was then passed to her daughter, who or a niece, who revealed this in the 1970s, much later. the corpses were not human. And so this reverend walked over to the craft, which was not an airplane because it didn't have wings. And he looked inside and he saw what could best be described as fiber optic cable, glowing wires that, and just the whole idea of glowing fluorescence. We hadn't done much with fluorescence during that period of time, 1950s, 1960s. I remember in the 1960s, there were national collection drives for fireflies in the back of kids' magazines, science magazines, where you could collect fireflies and mail them in. And it was to help scientists learn how fireflies light up. What is the chemical? What is the process by which fireflies light up? Now, I'm not linking that to UFOs at all. I'm just saying that there's a lot of scientific inquiry going on after, well, I was going to say after we started noticing UFOs after World War II, but that isn't quite correct. There's always been UFOs. They became more noticeable after World War II because humans started developing the technology to notice them more, I think. What do you think?
Right.
Does that theory hold water?
Yeah, that seems logical because you see a lot like now. All right, so we had a guest on we had one of our people in the chat room say he's from there we go. Grew up in Nottingham, in England. Derby was next to us. Seen too many unusual sky activity. I noticed that a lot of European, a lot of Eastern U.S., a lot of Western, Southwestern U.S. It seems like they focal point in one particular area of the country or the world, for that matter. Do you find that?
I agree.
Yeah.
Think about the race for radio.
Oh,
We had several top scientists around the world in competition. Marconi is thought perhaps to have beaten Edison. Edison was kind of a dirty player, dirty trickster. He wasn't that nice of a guy. I know he gets big props in the history books, and I'm not belittling his accomplishments by any means, but for one thing, he was at odds with Nikola Tesla, and I'm a total Tesla head. So, so too bad, Thomas.
So you think the more populated areas that use more radio wave, more radio technology, more nuclear technology, for that matter, are a zone where the aliens are going to focus on? Yes.
Oh, I don't know about that. No, I think it's kind of the opposite, that they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere all the time and have been. And it's humans who have developed the technology to notice them better, like radar, for example. Radar came out of World Wars I and more precisely World War II. They got the idea for radar in World War I, and they just didn't have time. And of course, there's nothing like a war to fund advanced technologies and provide testing grounds for them.
Yeah, right.
So,
middle of Southwest,
so that happened.
Nowhere.
That's happened a few times.
That's true. So, of your top 10 cases, Gene, what are your top 3 from your book?
Well, the way the book is structured, it's not quite that way. It's a chronology. But if you want me to pick the top 3 of in terms of influence,
yeah,
sure. I mean, we can rate on, if we want to, let's rate in terms of popularity or fame, if you will.
Yeah, fame.
The stories that people would know, because these, when we say a case, it's a UFO case. That's a story, people. It's a story that people. There were, in fact, the way I've arranged my book, every chapter tells the story, and then talks about the observers, the witnesses, and how credible they might or might not be, and how many of them there were.
Yeah. And
then the third section talks about the publicity. How did the media cover this, if at all? Was it positive, negative, neutral? And then why is this case important, so important enough to be in a top 10 book? And that's my opinion. That's my chance to editorialize. And then I have closing remarks to segue neatly into the next chapter. So clearly the events that most Americans would know, I would imagine, would be Roswell, number 1, right? First and foremost, Roswell. A lot of people have heard about Betty and Barney Hill.
Yes,
which is one of my favorite cases in the sense that it's been very well documented by Betty Hill's niece, Kathy Marden, who just recently had a birthday, I think. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And, although I may be wrong about that.
Maybe not.
And she partnered with Stanton Friedman, rest in peace. And they did, and other people as well have done very complete work on Betty Hill and Barney Hill.
It's an interesting case. Go on, give
It
me a
was
third
the
one.
first widely publicized case, which is
Yep.
why I think it's very prominent and important. And then I'd also say actually Phoenix Lights, because it was this mass sighting. It's the kind of sighting that we're getting out of Mexico and other South American countries on a fairly regular basis. And they're getting daylight sightings on a par with Phoenix Lights, which was a nighttime. It's actually 2 series of events. There was a huge hulking UFO that cruised slowly, blocking out the sky over downtown Phoenix. And then west of that, west of Phoenix proper, coming from basically Las Vegas and traveling toward the east, there were more like flights or flotillas of lights that the military discounted as flares, but they weren't behaving like flares. So there's speculation as to were these 2 events related, other than by the fact that they happened on the same night. We'll probably never know. Now, the military may well know, because I'm seeing headlines where and stories that allege that from alleged whistleblowers and military insiders that the military has the technology to see everything with very good resolution. By everything, I mean there's a UFO in the sky. The average camera from the average user isn't going to show much definition because it's too weak and wimpy. The lenses aren't that good. It's not meant to do that. It's not an astronomical camera. But apparently, the real astronomers working for government have all the good toys, and they're seeing everything. Right.
I bet.
There was a story that satellites from space, this was years ago, 10 years ago, a satellite from space could see the details of a dime on the sidewalk from, now I don't know what the height was, 20,000 feet up, I think, something like that.
I believe it. But, I've known some people in the military,
including the Mint, Denver or San Francisco. Right.
Right. That's I'm sure they have the technology. I'm sure they know a little bit more than we do.
But in terms of my actual favorite cases, some that are lesser known, so we start with Foo Fighters. It's an interesting topic, but there isn't much information about it because the subject was ridiculed back in World War II. And when these fighters came home from the European theater, and to a lesser extent the Japanese theater, because there were some of these Foo Fighters, which, by the way, were basically mysterious balls of light behaving aerodynamically, keeping pace with jets, circling jets, taunting and teasing jets, terrorizing jet pilots, and having a good old time, buzzing them and then going away. I don't know that they were responsible for any crashes per se. I can't speak definitively, but basically it seemed like the kind of cat and mouse behavior that we've noticed subsequently. Now, was
that only Allied crafts, or was that?
No, I think all of everybody,
well. They all,
the Axis and the Allies were reporting these Foo Fighters. But what's weird about Foo Fighters is that the phenomenon of these craft-like lights, buzzing aircraft, the most advanced aircraft on the planet at the time, right? Military aircraft. They disappeared after World War II.
Yep.
So what was that about? That's something I haven't read anybody really talk about much. So after the story I think I would mention is very prominent that doesn't get enough press is chapter 2 in my book, which is Kenneth Arnold. Now, Kenneth Arnold had a sighting 2 weeks before Roswell.
Oh, wow.
Let that sink in for a minute.
That's a coincidence, yeah.
2 weeks before Roswell, a private pilot, a pilot with his own private plane, is flying the slopes of Mount Rainier
in Washington. Yeah, I read
for a downed military craft. I think it was Navy, and all hands were lost in severe weather. And there was a reward posted by the families of the deceased to locate the wreckage so they could have closure.
Yep.
And he was cruising the southwest slopes of Mount Rainier when he glanced up and saw what he described as a string of silvery lights similar to a Chinese kite. Later, he described it as with a motion like a Chinese kite, which would be kind of undulating, the tail of a kite.
Yeah,
And so I started looking into kites, and I looked at his picture, and the picture he drew is of a delta kite. It's got a round front and almost like a Batman wing in the back. It's scooped in the back. And so after World War II, the military started looking into the delta wing, delta craft.
Yep.
And a kite maker started to make delta kites. And I wondered, but Kenneth Arnold was very emphatic, and he talked about Chinese kites. So I did some research on Chinese kites, and there's a couple of different kinds, but they are noted for having articulated tails that come out and undulate with wind currents and drop, lift and drop.
I know what you mean.
And
I can see it
so
in my head.
what he saw were these delta-shaped silvery objects, and there were, I'm trying to remember, something like 9 of them. It's been a while since I read up on the case, but there were more than a few, and they were in formation. They moved, if not as one, as if they were associated, as they would be, were they connected to the same kite, if you catch my drift. Okay. In other words, they weren't behaving independently. They were collaborative.
Right.
And he used parts on his airplane to measure the speed of these objects as they went from one landmark to another landmark. And he calculated the speed as being incredibly fast, faster than anything that humans had at the time. And when he landed at Yakima, the next airport, he told reporters what he'd seen, and it caught like wildfire, and he becomes an instant celebrity, basically. And he's put on the radio the next day. And if you go over to YouTube, it used to be, when I wrote my book, I could find the original Kenneth Arnold radio interview where he's describing what he saw. And I'm happy to tell you that I studied acting, and I don't claim to be a great judge of character, but there's the ring of truth to this guy's shock and awe excitement. He's babbling, he's bubbly. Not to say that nobody could fake that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that this was in a time when there was a stigma against reporting, and he reported anyway. It's hard to say if he was a credible witness. The problem is there was only one witness, right? That makes it harder, right? It's his word against the world's. We'd had Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio show, and there were lots of pulp magazines and comic books and Buck Rogers in the newspaper. So spacecraft and time travel were on people's minds at this time in history, right? So they were popular topics. But there's just something about the Kenneth Arnold sighting that rings true to me based on his own interview on radio and what happened afterwards, which was the precursor of what happened at Roswell. This was basically, apparently, the military's training exercise to get ready for a massive cover-up that would happen at Roswell, because Kenneth Arnold was a minor cover-up. Initial reports where he's like very certain and being treated as credible, that he has no stake in the game. This doesn't have to do with the reward. This has to do with something completely different, something he saw, and that's incredible and shouldn't be there. And then 2 weeks later, Roswell shouldn't be there. Apparently never was. Complete denial.
Blew up completely.
So that's an interesting case. Another one is Kecksburg. That's in Pennsylvania. Kecksburg was a case where I want to say bell-shaped or acorn-shaped craft sort of wafted over the skyline at dusk. So kids were out riding their bicycles, getting that last little. This was back when kids could stay out and play until the streetlights went on. Yep. So, and no cell phones, of course, nothing like that.
Right.
So kids were outside playing and doing what kids do. And a lot of kids saw this thing. It looked like it was semi-controlled. It was coming in and having a little trouble, but it did glide to a more or less controlled landing and plowed into a gully on a hill or mountain, whatever you want to call, that local people hunted on. So this was land that it was on sort of the outskirts of town, and the locals who did hunt went right out there. They knew the trails through the woods, and they got there first. And they described I wanted to say glowing, pulsating wreckage, but that's a bit of an exaggeration. They did report wreckage, and they reported gouge marks, and they reported strange markings on the craft. They didn't say hieroglyphics exactly, but they weren't there very long because the military hustled right up, which raises questions of its own. How did they get there so fast? So there were good eyewitnesses saying that the craft was recovered by the military in very short order and put on the back of a flatbed truck and trucked away to parts unknown.
I believe it.
And that seems credible.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this case to me is that the media started to spin this story right afterwards. And the powers that be, CIA, let's call it who it is, the CIA on its decades-long program of denial, discreditation, and distraction,
right,
started going all propaganda on the residents of Kecksburg, and anybody who would believe that a UFO could waft into town and plow into a ravine and get retrieved by the U.S. military. That's ridiculous, right? You got to be crazy to believe that, right? So what ended up happening was that about half the people in Kecksburg, those who didn't see it or didn't know anybody who saw it and who believed mainstream media outlets, said, we don't think it happened in our own town. We don't think it happened. And that the other half of the people were wrong. So chew on that. That's the power of media. That's the power of persuasion, the power of propaganda.
Of course.
You know, of an opinion that is repeated over and over and over. And what's interesting now in history, I can get to a third case in a minute, but what's interesting now in history is that with the Pentagon's announcement that that the hardware is real, UFOs are real, but Pentagon's still not saying who's building them or where they come from, which seems a little ridiculous. Somebody has to be building them, and they have to come from somewhere. So,
of course,
it's not really clear what they're
probably not Russian made.
They're not disclosing their agenda.
Probably not made.
But if you ask me what's changed in the UFO disclosure landscape, not that much, a little, but not that much. We're still, there's still plenty of fodder for
they give us a little bit.
Books.
They give us a little bit. They don't give us a lot these days.
They
have these big announcements and stuff. But
if I got time, the last case would be Malmstrom, which is not a single case, but many occurrences that are still ongoing. Malmstrom is an Air Force base up in, I want to say, I can find out. Malmstrom. It's hard to say. Page 126. Get that in the light. Okie dokie. Northern Montana, big sky country.
Middle of nowhere.
Northern Montana. This is the missile ranges of North America. These are some of the ranges that NORAD controls out of Colorado. Okay. So this happened, the event in my book happened overnight, March 16th, 1967. So now we're talking 1967. And basically what happened in a nutshell, there were a series of UFO sightings in the spring. That was March. So before that, from January, basically, UFOs had been coming and hovering over the facility. And the way these facilities are constructed, you've got missile silos with the potential for a nuclear-tipped missile pointing toward Russia. There's two officers in the missile silos. And then there's above ground support personnel that are security guards or maintenance or probably meteorologists, the kind of people you'd expect on the surface. But down in the bunkers, in the bomb bunkers, are two-person teams, and it's almost always men, so please don't call me sexist, but two-man teams. And in this case, it was Robert J. Salas, who's reporting this as an inside whistleblower with his commanding officer. And his commanding officer had been taking nap time, mandatory sleep time, downtime, and he was at the radar and in front of an array of computer-based bomb controlling and all kinds of equipment controlling levers, knobs, all the stuff that you could see pictures of what these installations look like, and it's very interesting, I think. In any event, he got a report from topside that a UFO was hovering over the facility, and it was enormous, and it was causing all the enlisted men and women up on the top to soil their pants.
Of course.
Because it was silent, it was hovering, it was big, and this wasn't the first time. So Salas is getting a play-by-play, trying to figure out how serious is this. And then the arrays, the computer arrays, so the lights and controls in the bunker go out. Everything just goes off. The armed missiles go to disarmed state.
Oh, wow.
And it starts with a few. It wasn't all of them, but it was most of them. And this happened at other missile sites in this area. Okay, so the military named these arrays, missile arrays, Alpha, Echo. Aren't these the names of the alphabet in military?
Yeah, military alphabet.
Signaling? Yeah. So they had letter designations, and Salas was with Echo, the Echo group, and each one of these had an array of, gosh, don't misquote me, but something like 9 missiles or 10. Yep. 9 or 10. And so when 8 of them go down, it's alarming. And that happened at more than one of these missile sites. And it took 16 hours for crews to repair this, to get the computers back online.
Now, when was that? What year was that in?
67. And at the on that same event, the UFO was seen on the surface, from the surface, to emit a beam and sweep buildings and installations and everything, just probing, just doing its little exam and probing, and nobody could do anything about it. One officer had to be reassigned. He was so freaked out by this event. Not an officer, I keep saying officer, one enlisted man who was doing security had to be reassigned because he had the willies so bad from this. And Salas came forward because the military did a complete denial and cover up that this ever happened. And apparently it's still going on today. These displays, the point being that UFOs show up and they have superior force over humans' seemingly most powerful weapon, meaning nuclear missiles. UFOs show up and they just disable them as a show of force, in my opinion, as is the cat and mouse behavior in terms of aeronautics, literally flying circles around a human plane. If that's not a show of force, a display of power, what is it? And yet they are not shooting us down, even as we try to shoot them down, or at least I have very little intel on that. We don't hear about our craft going down at the hands of theirs. Is it covered up? Is it not happening? I don't know, but it does seem odd.
It is definitely odd. One of our people in the chat room, Damien Smith, he mentioned the fire in the sky and how it was. I can tell you, when I saw fire in the sky for the first time, I was absolutely terrified, Gene. It was probably like 11 or 12 years old when it came out. It was pretty good. But what fascinates me about Travis Walton, is that who that is?
Chapter 8. Travis Walton, Chapter 8.
Travis Walton and Betty Hill are there two survivors. They not only just saw like a light in the sky, they not only saw a figure, but they were abducted by aliens. They have very real trauma memories have real traumatic experiences from these memories. That it's so prolific to me. Damien also mentions the link to Skywalker Ranch, which I'm not really sure how I feel about that. And
I'm with you. I'm on the fence.
UFO activity. Do you believe there's any relation there, or what are your thoughts?
Between Skywalker and what now?
Skywalker Ranch and UFO activity above. Do you think there's some kind of connection?
But I wanted to talk about before we get to that.
Travis Walton.
Yeah, Travis Walton. Thanks.
Yeah.
I've met Travis at 2 UFO conventions, and I think he's genuine.
Yeah.
My spidey sense says he's genuine. I could be wrong, but he's sure he's genuine. And his story shifted from they almost killed me and I survived a horrific incident after 5 days of being missing. By the way, that's the hallmark of the Travis Walton case, is that he was he crept up on a landed UFO from the truck of his logging crew in Arizona timberland. They'd been logging, and they saw a craft off in the woods. They pulled over. He got out of he was the only one to get out of the truck, and he got close, and he had the instincts of a hunter, where he's crouching behind bushes and felled tree trunks and clumps of brush. And apparently he got too close for comfort for the occupants. They shot out a blue beam and knocked him back about 12 feet, the people in the truck reckon, and he landed on his left shoulder and back and basically passed out, stopped moving. So they freaked out in the truck, and the crew boss who was driving backed out in a hurry, and they bumped along a very torturous logging road, a dirt and gravel, probably rutted out road.
Yeah.
And when they had to slow down, the crew boss would say, "We should go back for Travis. We should go back for Travis." But they didn't until they got to the Blacktop Road. And apparently they felt so safe and secure at that point that they could get back to the Blacktop Road without any confrontation with a craft over the truck, that the crew boss said, "Well, I don't know about you guys, but I can't go on without Travis, so I'm going back. If you guys want to wait on a dark, lonely highway where we know a UFO is in the area, you're free to do so." And they said, "No, we'll go back." So they all went back, and Travis wasn't there. So Travis reappeared 5 days later, and he has and so in my book, I divide the story at that point. At the point where Travis is knocked down, I divide the story because it forks. It forks into the guys in the truck as versus what happened to Travis. So what happened to Travis was that he was taken aboard the craft and basically put back together, patched together. And later, about 10, 15 years after he started reporting on this event at conferences, because he didn't do it right away, he waited. And then I guess he thought his truth was so compelling, he had to share it. That's his story. He decided later that, and he said after that event, he had more interactions with these aliens. And he's convinced now that they meant him no harm. They overestimated the force of their beam and killed him, gave him a lethal blow. He was going to be dead. So they brought him on the craft so as not to basically mess up the prime directive, if you will, that they didn't have the right to take his life, so they're going to make him whole, right? Which is a legal phrase for compensate with money, but they made him whole in the health sense. And so they put him back. They dumped him on the highway outside of town, and he wandered back in all dazed and confused and found a bank of pay phones. All you younger listeners, you probably never even saw one, but there used to be pay telephones where you put money in. He had spare change or scrounged some up and contacted his brother-in-law, who didn't believe it was him, because for 5 days the media had been accusing the survivors of murdering their companion.
Right.
It's a crazy, awesome story.
Just popped up. It's not like
he's still alive.
To manufacture a story like that with that kind of emotional attachment, it's just like somebody who works in mental health. It's just not really like the kind of like trauma this guy carried with him afterwards. It's not really. It's really. I mean, I guess you could manufacture it, but I mean, I would imagine it's very difficult to fool somebody. I don't know.
I'm not saying
a story like that. I don't know.
Sometimes I wonder if any of the UFO stuff is real, actually.
Okay.
In other words, in terms of my personal experience, I have strong reasons to believe, but I can't prove that I was one of many, many, many abductees taken before I could talk, at age of 3 or 4, and that I was taken into a craft near my house and basically instructed, shown things and given instructions. I was not in any breeding program. I was shown an array of what we would call screens today, illuminated screens. There's nothing like this existed in the early 1960s when all this would have happened. And I didn't have words for any of this anyway, but basically more or less like televisions. I knew what a television was. So more or less like that, but different, lots of human children sitting and looking at these things and basically doing now what I would call working in a computer or something very similar, where you had keys that you could press to create results on a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And these were basically tests, as I understood it, tests to teaching tests. And I don't know what, I don't have specific memory of what I was put through, if you will,
Right.
being so young and inarticulate. But I am left with the distinct impression that my mission, if you will, from them is to talk UFO stuff as what Dolores Cannon would call first wave.
Mm-hmm.
First wave, or nearly tail end of first wave starseeds. In other words, people who would fight the CIA narrative that you have to be crazy to believe in UFOs and say, look, there seems to be some credence and factuality and credibility to this. Could we not look at this more scientifically and metaphysically as well? Metaphysics being the higher octave of empiricism.
Mm-hmm.
So that never happened. It still hasn't happened. It's still not happening. There has to be a schism, divide between science and paranormalism.
Yeah,
Whereas
right.
ghost hunters like you are starting to bring that together with equipment to measure paranormal effects. And what do you think of that?
Trying, but honestly, I find more in my, well, other than like audio, audio has always been my bread and butter. But as far as all the bells and the whistles, all the gadgets that the investigators carry, I find honestly just as much effectivity in, like, say, the K2 meter as I do like a cat ball, or like, say, in an audio recorder. I find more evidence, if you will, through experience, which isn't really anecdotal, isn't really covered by the scientific world. So until I can figure out some way to logistically prove that ghosts are real, I guess I'm in the same boat that you are, Gene.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. When we have
Mhm.
only a single observer, such as Kenneth Arnold, it's his word against anybody else's, right?
Right.
But when you have Malmstrom, where there were radar contacts and visual sightings as well, many high profile incidents. One of the chapters in my book is on the so-called invasion of Washington. This was in the 1950s. Not flotillas, but arrays of UFOs maneuvering over Washington, D.C. and over the national airport, which was very concerning and caused a bit of panic, actually, at the time.
Oh, I bet.
And then was sort of whitewashed by the media afterwards. There was no denying that it happened, but it was downplayed to the point where most people now don't know it happened. And yet, in the annals of ufology, it's very significant because the military had eyes on. It was unequivocal that it was happening. You couldn't argue it. And this evidence is so old that when you ask about Skinwalker Ranch, I'm torn between the likelihood that something weird is going on there because so much weird stuff goes on.
It's like everything that could happen happens at Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know,
but when
honestly,
I
where I
saw some
stand
of the
on it.
shows, I was it's going to be hard not to be disrespectful, but the way the topics were covered, the format of the show, and in my case as a female researcher, please don't hate me, the fact it was all guys, it was a boys club, that was very off-putting for me.
Right.
And they all came off as these great experts with all this great evidence. And maybe I know personally people who have been to Skinwalker and attest to the truth of these various phenomena. They say it's true. Maybe I'm just not happy with the way it's being exploited, if you will.
Right.
But if I were them, would I do the same thing? Maybe I would. You got to make a buck.
Maybe.
And just because they're exploiting the opportunity doesn't mean it's not true. If you had a UFO ranch, why wouldn't you try to milk it for something?
If you had a ranch that gave you everything from ghosts to cryptids to UFOs, yeah, why not? Like any other haunted location here in Rhode Island or anywhere in the United States, they're a dime a dozen nowadays, and some of them are reasonable and some of them are like outlandish. But what's stopping people from charging these outrageous prices? And because people just keep coming in, people just want to see it. So I mean, how dumb are they for just trying to make a buck? I don't know.
Caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. That's all I can
Right.
say about that.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
there is one phenomenon that I've read lately. Science may have actually solved a mystery, the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle,
Really?
where
Okay.
planes go down and ships go down and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
kinds,
yeah.
and
All that
people
bad
are
stuff
lost, never to
happens.
be seen again, and et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. And the typical scenario is dark clouds form and make an electromagnetic storm, and compass points start spinning around. There's general disorientation, and then no more communication.
Hmm.
And I think in some cases, lost ships and planes showed up decades later. I'm not so sure about that. If that were happening, that would be more along the lines of this Nikola Tesla theory about uh, magnetism and gravitational fields and electrical fields causing distortions in the temporal continuum. Because what scientists found, for better or for worse, for true or for not, I think this fact is true, but whether it explains Bermuda Triangle remains to be seen. But so far it's sounding pretty plausible. Huge deposits of magnetic rock off the coast of Bermuda, underwater, right? Underwater deposits. All of a sudden, the mineral composition of the earth changes around Bermuda,
Yep.
and the ore underwater becomes super enriched with magnetic metal. Right? Magnetic metal. And so if you flew over large magnetic deposits, yeah, your compass would start doing like that, I would think. And but that doesn't necessarily explain these storms that come up quickly. And especially when the pilots are saying, or the people on the ship are saying, there was not a cloud in the sky. And I understand this kind of weather can happen. It just seems like if we correlated how many times that happened in the Bermuda Triangle, where there was a sudden storm and then everything lost. I don't know. What do y'all think?
But let me on that point. Let me ask you something, Gene. You're from Florida, are you not?
I have lived in Florida.
So all right. So I'm on the eastern seaboard myself. I'm in Rhode Island. We're expecting one this week. How many hurricanes come through this area from Florida to New England throughout from like June to November in a year? Is my first point. The second point is how in living in Florida, how quickly does the weather change like that? Where it's sunny and beautiful and then it's like a torrential downpour. Doesn't that happen? Isn't that kind of like a thing?
It could be. It could be a thing. I am no expert on the tropics or the subtropics or
I'm
any of
not a
that
weather
stuff.
guy, but another
I
money
know a lot
making.
about weather, but not that anomaly. See,
All
the thing
right,
about Bermuda Triangle is that it's an anomaly. It's not like everywhere else.
right.
Weird stuff happens there, but not anywhere else. And how come it's a triangle? Bermuda to what, Miami, and then up to
Yeah.
somewhere on the more northern East Coast. I'm trying to remember where it is, or is it Bahamas?
I think it's Bahamas,
Bahamas,
Florida,
Bermuda, and Miami.
yeah, I think something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. It's the Bermuda
We have
Triangle.
a similar triangle up here in New England called the Bridgewater Triangle.
Oh,
It's more
really?
known for like ghost spiritual activity and cryptids. I think there is actually UFO and like probably other supernatural entities that all kind of congregate into this one little triangle in southeastern Massachusetts. I don't know. I don't know.
Exactly. I like the title of my book, Unknown Objects, because I think this really says it. They're unknown. These things, whatever they are genuinely unknown, at least to us, we the people.
Yeah, right.
The military may know well about them, but they're not sharing all those secrets. And that's just to loop back into Malmstrom one more time.
Yep.
The reason that Robert Salas came forward as a whistleblower was because he thought the public deserved to know. And this is a prevailing theme amongst whistleblowers in military and other arenas. But most of it's the military in control of the UFO narrative and artifacts. So it's no surprise that they're involved in all these stories and that the people involved with the military have stories to tell, right?
Right.
So
is that
will we ever know the truth?
Let me just toss something out for you, Dean. As a citizen of this country, of the United States, I enjoy my freedoms. I enjoy my happy life. I enjoy the ability to get in my car and go to work every morning, or to like take a day off and like drink some beers, or to go sit on the lake and go fishing, whatever I want to do. Right? in the safety and tranquility of my home here in Rhode Island. The U.S. military is allegedly, and the U.S. government is allegedly keeping the secrets and all this news and all this information about potential aliens for the last almost 100 years now. Where's the problem? I mean, where I could maybe handle it, I don't feel like half of this country could handle it and might have a breakdown of some sort.
Well, they would, if I could just interject, they would, because the CIA has spent the last 75 years debunking UFOs. What if the CIA or another agency had spent the last 75 years enculturating us to UFOs?
Yeah, right. We might be a little bit
without
more,
fear, or with whatever emotion is actually appropriate, because it doesn't seem like these other beings are threatening us in any direct way. Meaning they're not shooting our planes, they're not shooting our cities. They may be abducting people to do experiments and such, or for their own purposes, but they clearly don't want to annihilate humanity unless it's by terraforming, which is another rabbit hole. That aliens are terraforming Earth to make it habitable for them and not for us. But I think that's kind of a long shot. I really think that the UFO agenda is resident with top levels of government around the world. And the likes of you and me, buddy, and esteemed audience, will never know unless you're very high up on the inside there. None of us will ever know.
I mean, I'd love to see the bodies. I guess I'd love to see the craft, but do I really need to know? Do we really need to know, Gene?
I think it's terribly important to know if aliens created us and are now running our world. That's my opinion. And I think that's actually what's happening.
No, that's
in a nutshell. I think that's my theory, that the Anunnaki aliens bioengineered us to slave for gold in the hot sun, and we continue to do that to this day. I mean, if you look at what Buckminster Fuller said, he said, we don't need a 40, and this was a forward thinker in the 1960s, who developed the geodesic dome. And he said, we don't need a 40-hour work week. We should let creators create.
All right. What kind of alien are you talking about? The what was that? The Anunnaki?
Anunnaki.
And what is that? Is that a
So the Anunnaki are out of Sumerian writing text.
Okay.
And the Sumerians are the oldest civilization on Earth who left writing behind that we found. So that's a lot of caveats. But it is the oldest writing we know of. And and in those days, writing was a privilege, and only very elite people could read and write.
True.
And so the very first records from Sumeria came from landowners who wanted to count their livestock and crops. So it was for counting and accounting. That's one of the first uses of inscribing data on a wet clay tablet, which is how the Sumerians did inscribe. They used a script called cuneiform, which is done with a pick-like instrument, and you can look it up if you care to, but it's ancient writing, and they were interested in counting cattle and crops for taxation, which I found very interesting, because other texts say that this is a prison planet for thieves and tax evaders. Another story for another day.
Of course.
So the Anunnaki came because they wanted gold from Earth. Earth is rich in gold. They wanted a certain type of gold, monatomic, meaning single atom. And they knew how to make it from gold on Earth. And they were going to ship it back. They did. They were shipping it back to their home. I sound like Donald Trump. They did. No, allegedly they were shipping it back to their home planet to save its atmosphere, but it was too little, too late, and their home planet failed.
Wow.
So some of the Anunnaki stayed. Some of the Anunnaki stayed behind on Earth to oversee gold mining, which still goes on, but gold has now become fiat, meaning currency that isn't backed by gold or silver or anything tangible. That's what we have in the United States now, and in many countries we have fiat currencies. We went off the silver standard, we went off the gold standard, we have no metal standard at all, And paper money is just that, paper. It has value because people agree upon it, but it's not backed by any metal. It's not backed by anything valuable. There's no store of value in a piece of paper.
Right. So another question from one of our chat group. Sarah Dickinson asks that now I hear this a lot from people. A lot of Bigfoot sightings are often aligned with UFO sightings. Quite interesting. Some people say that there's a correlation between Bigfoot and aliens, or Bigfoot and spirits, or all three combined. What are your thoughts on that, Gene?
I think that's spot on.
Really?
I'm not a Bigfoot specialist, but I know several people who are huge into Bigfoot and other cryptids. And there's definitely a correlation between Bigfoot sightings and UFO presence. And I've heard descriptions of Bigfoot literally between one step and the next step disappearing into the earth as a phenomenon, association with portals, teleportation portals or something along that line. It wouldn't surprise me at all if there's some sort of connection between. I could even go so far as to say, and I wouldn't be embarrassed. This is a very bold and wild claim. I wouldn't be surprised if UFOs were involved in every paranormal activity on Earth and beyond.
Wow.
If they didn't invent paranormal or define paranormal or embody paranormal. And we are, after all, made in the image of the gods. The Bible talks about the gods, not God with a capital G. And I read Genesis because my mother said I should read the Bible. Everybody should read it. And when I got to that part, Genesis starts out very casually. And in those days, there were giants. I've never forgotten it. And in those days, there were giants. Like, everybody knows it. We don't even need to explain this any further. And so mainstream Christianity spent centuries debunking that one line in the Bible. Giants, it's a mistranslation, or they didn't mean that. I'm like, how could you interpret that statement in any other way except that if you go in that direction, you're going to go into the kingdom of the giants where bad things happen. See the story of David and Goliath for details. And there's giant skeletons all over Earth. Smithsonian was digging up giant, by which I mean skeletons of gigantic beings of a gigantic size, 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, 15 foot, 20 foot, 30 foot. There is a reconstruction of a giant skeleton in some South American country where they've made the museum. It has a main level and then a second level, and they've cut a hole out on the second level. It's ramps around it so that this recreated giant, it's like 30 feet tall. It goes up through the floors like a dinosaur skeleton might do in a natural science museum. But this is a skeleton of a human purported to be, DNA tested, the real deal, not just hokum.
Yeah, there was actually the oldest military memoriam in North America. It's right here in Rhode Island. It was from the King Philip's War from 1675 to 1676. It was a little war that the English colonists fought against the local Native American tribes, and one of the Nine Men's Misery. So that's the site that's in Cumberland, Rhode Island. It's near the Cumberland Monastery, which is now the Cumberland Public Library. But these 9 men, they were in what's known as Pierce's Fight, which was over in what's now Central Falls. So the Native Americans basically lured them across the river, lured them into a trap. They thought they were chasing down like 20 or 30 squalls, and they came into a warring party and basically got slaughtered. These 9 guys survived, and they started making their way back north towards Massachusetts Bay Colony. They ran into the winter home of the Narragansett tribe. Narragansetts remembered that they had massacred that tribe just the winter before. So the year before, so they skinned them all alive and burned them all alive, and left one of them alive to go and report to the British what had actually happened. One of the guys that were murdered, though, that were skinned alive, this guy by the name of Buckner. He's about 8 feet tall. He had 2 rows of teeth. He was like a modern day giant in the 17th century. It's documented in the 19th century. A local medical doctor, and some students went and dug him up, and were doing experiments on them, and then they got caught, and they ended up cementing over the spot and building this memoriam that they have there now that the brothers put in place. But yeah, the modern day giants, we have that history here in Rhode Island. It's just that one case, but I mean, it wasn't too long. It was only a couple hundred years ago where this guy was walking the earth. So I do find these little tales from the past, like dragons and things that you don't see anymore, had some credibility through like literature or through anecdotal tales or whatnot. I don't know.
Right. Well, the giants I'm talking about are well over 8 foot. I mean, 8 foot is tall, but as viewer Damien points out, Andre the Giant was 8 feet tall. I'm talking about much taller, 12 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, and up. Biblical proportion, shall we say? Biblical proportion. So what interests me as a researcher and a scientist is why the Smithsonian would cover up giant skeletons and claim they had not found any when they had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
That's my angle. I want to know why, as a conspiracy theorist, I want to know why are you lying and covering up? Ultimately, it's federal government. It seems like it's federal. In other words, who at the Smithsonian got an order from some federal agency? Ixnay on the INJ, you know?
Right.
Put a schnotz on that. And let's not talk about that anymore. Until finally the evidence is incontrovertible. There's so many archaeological teams and just farmers unearthing giant bones all around the world that it's clear that in those days there were giants, simply put, you know? So I think the Bible has a lot of true history. It's always the Bible interpreters talk a lot about parable, metaphor, and symbolism.
Right.
But as a UFO researcher, I am much more literal with the Bible as I am with Sumerian text. And getting back to Sumerian text, they're saying a lot of the same things. That, in other words, it's probable, if not inevitable, that the civilizations that followed the Sumerians, the big civilizations that we know about today, who followed the Sumerians, and those would be the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and then we get up to the ancient Egyptians. Okay, only then do we get up to the ancient Egyptians. There's so much relationship and correlation between ancient Egyptian art and thought, if you will, legend and lore and belief, and the Sumerians, that it can't be accidental. People point out that certain gods or goddesses are depicted in the same ways or similar ways in 9 different cultures around the globe. How could that be? You know, feathered serpent, for example, feathered serpent as a motif, or dragon. These are prevailing motifs. And how is it that there are literally pyramids all over the world? How did all these people get who didn't have the wheel? Right. How did they get the idea? I guess piling up stones, you would think, how can I get higher and higher and higher? Because there are reasons, you know, tactical and strategic reasons why you would want to, if you lived on a plain, a flat plain, piling up things gives you an advantage. You can see further away. You can look for prey or food or enemies. But if you look at the Great Pyramids, this is not just piling up rocks. This is precision science.
Right. And it's lasted for thousands of years. The buildings have lasted for thousands and thousands of years. And what enables them to be able to get stone that high off the ground? Yeah, that does continue to blow my mind. I can only believe that the Hebrew indentured servants that the Egyptians used could only do it so much. I mean, I don't know. It seems a little bit.
The problem with the theory is that humans built the pyramids. One big problem is that there's no evidence of tools.
Right.
And it would be a huge engineering project. And to my knowledge, and I haven't done any research lately, I'd love to know if anybody listening does know in the chat. It's my understanding there are no pictures like wall art. There's no wall art of the building of the pyramids. In other words, we would know how the pyramids were built if there were pictures, if the Egyptians who carved everything into pictures had left pictures of how to build a pyramid, but they didn't, did they?
Right. No, not
So
at all.
what the flock?
Damien,
What the flock? What is that about? I just
Damien
watched
suggests.
Stargate. I got to say, I just watched Stargate again.
Oh yeah,
And
that's
for those who haven't seen it lately, I'd kind of forgotten that the pyramids are shown in the film as being landing structures for the aliens ship to come down and sit on top of, with internal elevator shafts of the rings and being and subterranean. Well, the pyramid is basically a shelter from the desert storms and the heat, and a place to store stuff and just hang out and etc. But none that all has, as a metaphysicist, that all feels very right to me. When I saw Stargate for the first time, I thought, oh yeah, that's how it went down.
I mean, it very well could have. It does make more sense than what's left for us. I mean, in history, that's for sure. It does seem like a lot to take out. Damien suggested water pressure, but I mean, they had the Nile, but I mean, I don't know.
It's not impossible. It's not impossible. It's just that why don't we have pictures? The Egyptians chronicled so much stuff,
right?
Including apparently surgery, where they would take a human and an animal, chop off their heads surgically, and then clone them on each other.
Oh wow.
Which
crazy.
In terms of modern technology, we're looking at putting a human ear on a mouse, grafting a human ear onto a mouse, and they're able to do stuff like that. So humans are able to do that. So is it that far a stretch to think that a more advanced technology couldn't exchange the heads of the animals? This is very strange wall art, and it's documented that it exists. It's not just made up. So was this a cartoon? Was it real? In other words, again, getting back to stone carving as a more permanent way to scribe than on clay or on paper, papyrus. Stone is the most enduring. So there's a little, actually, I don't know. I can't say there's a little bit of graffiti. There is some graffiti, but I think it's mostly painted and not so much carved. But we do have graffiti about personages of the time. Somebody has a big butt. And Egyptian insults, which are somewhat strange, but probably not to them. And it's just, the fact that I have a very good friend who is looking into the pyramid building, and he thinks it was that basically they used pulleys and ropes to hoist containers. I forget his term for them, but containers of water that they used water as a way to build up the levels of the pyramid. It's a very clever architecture.
Yeah,
and yes, it could be done. It could be done.
It's kind of like what Damien's saying here with the waterways were everywhere at night. It's below zero. Waterways freeze. Slide the rock. Maybe slide the rock, but how
much does it freeze in North Africa? I don't know. In the Sahara.
Maybe the desert at night it freezes. But still, even at that, if you're sliding it left to right, yes.
I'm not saying it's impossible.
From like up here to up there.
I'm just saying it seems very hinky that we don't know. Right. That the Egyptians left no record of how the pyramids were built. Did they not think other people might be curious?
Oh, get those guys. Those
and how come the Egyptians don't know?
That dork show that used to be on A&E or the Discovery Channel, the Myth, or those guys, the Mythbusters. Get those guys and let them try and build a pyramid with basic BC technology. I bet they couldn't do it. I bet they wouldn't be able to do it. I don't know.
Tried to build pyramids in the way of the pyramids, of the Great Pyramids, and the Great Pyramids were sort of the peak of the technology. There are other pyramids throughout Egypt, many that are more decayed and crumbled and less sophisticated. And pyramids had different uses, apparently. Most of them seem to be burial chambers, but that wasn't the case at the Great Pyramids. There's something special about them, and the Sphinx being there and all. The Giza Plateau, there was something about it. And I think it was a spaceport. I think that whole area and Sinai in antiquity were the spaceport to take the gold out from South Africa, where the gold mines are. I'm big on the Sumerian legend, or history is really what I regard it as. It's actual history. This is actually what happened. And we still, and the alien overlords are still here, descendants of the Anunnaki, or they themselves, because they're very long lived on their own planet, or they were when they had a home planet, 3,000 years to one of ours.
Wow.
So incredibly old. And we would be a trifling to them. Think humanity would be a trifling to a civilization like that. And why would they care anything about us? Let us slave in the hot sun.
We are so catty.
For their means of sustenance, you know.
Yeah,
and if you look at the criticisms, many average people, including myself, point toward the globalists, the Illuminati, the elite. It's the same criticisms, that they have all the power and all the control and all the money, and they call all the shots. And we know that royals of different lineages around the world seek not to interbreed, not to taint their blood. And in royals of the West, they're called blue bloods. Is it because there's a coppery element that dates back to the Anunnaki? Is there a missing DNA component that came from the Anunnaki? There's a lot of genetic questions that relate to Anunnaki intervention and interference to bioengineer from proto-humans a human that would be smart enough to take orders, and strong enough to do this kind of work in the hot African sun, I might add, in the hot African sun. So what do we do today? I just want to circle back to this before, looks like we might be closing out at some point, but I could talk forever. That, but as I said, Buckminster Fuller, who was a future thinker from the 1960s, and who talked about alternatives to mainstream thinking. So he designed a geodesic dome to replace a cubic structure. Buildings are cubes or parallel pipeds, which is the technical name for a rectangle that has 3 dimensions. Okay. So Buckminster Fuller said, let's get away from the right angle thinking. Let's get away from it and go to other angles. And so he started to design geodesic shapes, which are the kinds of things you get from a crop circle 2-dimensionally. You get these basically energy type patterns that, and in his case, interlocking triangles, for example. He said, if we use as our building block not the square, but a triangle, it's much more sturdy and solid. And we can build domes of huge scale at very affordable cost, because the materials are attainable and within reach and sustainable as well, I think, to a great extent, depending on your technology, of course. But, compared to wind farm blades, geodesic domes are much more sustainable, although they do different things. These are structures to live in or store equipment in or do work out of. But he said, he challenged the notion that all buildings have to be rectangular and square. And he said, let's start building domes. And so hippies started building domes, and other people started building domes. And occasionally you'll see a dome structure. The problem with domes in our society is that we are not dome-like thinkers. We are square thinkers and cubicle thinkers. So one example springs to my mind is the modern art annex to the Denver Art Museum. There was a bid put out internationally for artists to bid on the to design a new wing to the Denver Art Museum that would house the modern art collection. And the winner came out with I'm at a loss for words. I want to be polite. A shocking design that does not fit any other I'm having trouble with words now. I'm getting very tired. Building. It doesn't match any other building in Colorado or maybe Earth. It looked like it was made out of titanium sheets, which was interesting, but very angular and pointy. It looked unfriendly to me. As a metaphysicist, it looked very unfriendly. And what they found out inside the building after they constructed it, at great cost, I might add, was that it's a very inefficient structure, unlike geodesic domes, which are more efficient. But this angular monstrosity, yes, I said it, is very inefficient and can't even. And so what they did to display art inside this thing, because the inside walls are at these weird angles,
Yep.
acute angles, and it's all interesting from what is the person that designs the building? Architect. It's interesting from an architectural perspective.
I bet.
But this is an art museum, people. We want to display art. And there's a reason why the Louvre Palace is shaped the way it is, with rooms of corridors and stuff. Corridors that lead to rooms. A long corridor with rooms on either side. This is a very efficient way, although very, very square. It's a square way to efficiently view art, because you start on one end and you just work your way around the whole perimeter. And sooner or later, if you have the time and access, you can see everything there, right? But with the Denver Art Museum, what they found was they couldn't display as much art because they had a lot of lost space.
Yep.
Space lost. And so they ended up putting horizontal or vertical background, what would you call it? A wall. They built walls. They built false walls inside the building to cover the angles where the wall actually ends back there. Just cover it over so we can hang some art out here.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So, nothing surprises me anymore.
Yeah, no, right. All right, Gene. I wanna thank you for coming on. It's been we gotta kind of wrap it up here. It's been, you've more than filled in the time. I was like, well, I got this guy not showing, but I got Jean coming on, and Jean can like, you can rivet audiences for hours, and we could go on for another hour or two, and you could continue to like blow my mind.
If I didn't pass out first. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, Jean.
You always have a lot of good stuff to say as well, and the audience is very savvy, I must say.
Yeah, they're very in it. I appreciate my audience. Damian Smith, Sarah Dickinson. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, you're watching us on the Get Haunted Network on Facebook. You're watching us on my Facebook on Facebook, and you're watching us on the Van Up by the Riv podcast on Facebook. You're also watching us on YouTube. You can see us on YouTube on our channel, Van Up by the Riv podcast channel, and on Twitch right now. We got a few people watching on Twitch. So instead of playing video games, they're watching our faces talk about UFOs. If you haven't had enough of UFOs and all sorts of weird conspiracies and all sorts of fun stuff, tune in next Tuesday, as the goat may join me, the goat may not join me, but if he doesn't, I have yet another riveting guest. He's a 14 investigator, which means he does cryptids, UFOs, and ghosts. He is a graduate from the Center of Media Arts, New York, NYC. He was his mother and his grandmother and his brother was witches. Over 55 years of experiences in the paranormals. He has psychic abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, that's feeling, claircognizant knowing. He's investigated, experienced, investigator, experiencer, researcher, cryptozoologist. He's an actor. He's actually appeared in a half dozen independent documentaries along with TV network regarding all aspects of the paranormal. He appeared in and co-directed a TV commercial for mountain biking. Has appeared and made CMTV music videos. Founder and director of the Bronxville Paranormal Society. He's the founder and director of the New York State UFO Project. Founder and director of the New York State Sasquatch Organization. Region 3 director of the North American Dogman Project. Ex-podcaster and co-host of Beyond the Realm Digital Radio Network. MUFON member, New York State chapter represent. Welcome to the show for the first time next week live. Al Santariga, New Yorker, probably a New York Teams fan. And if Bam's joins us, we'll talk all sorts of shit about teams that play out in New York. Go Red Sox. For Gene Broida, for Three Dudes, what you saw before this, for Van Down by the River podcast, this has been the Ghost and the Goat. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night, everybody. Peace.